My parents had already finished their anniversary dinner by the time I arrived. The moment I sat down, my mom smiled and said, "Oh good, you're here, you can cover the bill." My sister laughed, still as clueless as ever. That's when I realized I hadn't been invited to celebrate. I'd been invited to pay. I looked around the table, picked up my phone, and called the restaurant manager. Within minutes, the laughter stopped, and my sister's face turned pale. The restaurant sat at the edge of the waterfront, the kind of place that had been open long enough to have regulars, but new enough to still care about impressing them. No neon signs, no sandwich boards, just a dark wooden door with a brass handle and a small hand-lettered placard in the window with the name and the hours. Inside, it smelled like white wine and warm bread and something heavier. Truffle oil, maybe. Or a reduction sauce. Something that cost more than most people's lunches. The tables were covered in white linen. The candles were real, not the electric kind. The chairs had deep burgundy cushions, and the tables were spaced far enough apart that a conversation could stay private if the rest of the room cooperated. It was a Tuesday evening in October. The kind of night where the air has started to cool but hasn't committed to cold yet. Still soft, still carrying the last of summer at the edges, but with something underneath that reminded you it wouldn't last. I had driven 43 minutes to get there. I know the exact number because I had been watching the clock on my dashboard from the moment I pulled out of the gas station, where I stopped to change out of my work clothes in the bathroom. I had a blazer in my bag, and I put it on in the parking lot, smoothing my hair with my hands in the reflection of my rear window. I had wanted to look like I had made an effort. I had wanted to walk in and have them see someone who dressed for the occasion. I had texted the group chat at 6:48, running behind traffic on the bridge. "Please order appetizers without me. I'll be there by 7:15. The message had 3 scene receipts within 4 minutes. All of them had read it. Nobody replied. The hostess found my father's name in the system and led me through the dining room without small talk. Maybe she could read something in the way I was scanning the room, the particular alertness of someone braced for impact. I spotted my family near the back left, a round table by the window overlooking the harbor. The lights of the marina were reflected in the water below, shifting and blurring with the current, and in other circumstances it would have been beautiful. Under the circumstances I was walking toward, I barely registered it. My father was in the posture he adopted after a good meal, leaning back in his chair, one arm draped over the back, jacket unbuttoned, the unmistakable look of a man who had eaten well and drunk well and had nowhere to be. My mother was blotting her lips with the edge of her napkin. My sister was tilted toward the window with her wine glass raised at an angle, a pose I had seen 100 times in 100 variations, always the same essential quality: watchful, bored, slightly superior, waiting to be entertained. None of them were looking in my direction. There were 3 dessert bowls in the center of the table, scraped clean, 2 wine bottles, one empty, one with perhaps an inch remaining, used espresso cups. My mother filled her glass from the second bottle as I approached, without looking up, without offering to pour one for me. I looked at the chair they had left. It was pulled slightly away from the table as if someone had gestured toward it. "Here, this is yours," and then returned to something more important. No place setting, no silverware, no folded napkin, no water glass, no menu waiting for me, just the chair itself, and on the placemat in front of it, placed squarely in the center, the black leather folder, the check. I sat down. Growing up, I was the low-maintenance one. That was not a label I chose. It was handed to me early, before I had the words to understand what it meant, or the experience to recognize it as a warning. My mother used it at family gatherings, to aunts and neighbors and the mothers of my classmates. "Oh, she's the easy one. I never have to worry about her." She said it with genuine fondness, with relief, as if easy were the most valuable quality a child could have, as if not requiring attention were a form of virtue. My sister was 2 years older, and she was nothing like easy. She was loud and specific and vivid, the kind of person who fills a room with her presence before she has said anything. She had opinions about everything: food, teachers, the fairness of bedtimes, the way holidays should be organized. When she was happy, the house was electric. When she was unhappy, the house reorganized itself around managing that unhappiness. My parents would speak more quietly. Dinners would be delayed. Plans would shift. Weekends would rearrange. I learned to read my sister's moods the way you read weather. Not because I was frightened of her, but because her emotional state was the actual weather in our house. It determined what was possible. I don't remember being angry about this when I was young. I think I was too busy adapting to have room for anger. I became a quiet child, not unhappy, not invisible exactly, but very practiced at being fine. I made sandwiches when I was hungry and nobody was in the kitchen. I put band-aids on my own scraped knees. I did my homework at the table without being reminded and put it away without making an announcement. I learned to want very little because wanting things required attention, and I had understood early, without anyone saying so directly, that my sister had the first claim on whatever attention was available. There was only so much of it. The math was simple. What I didn't understand until much later was that every time I solved my own problem quietly, every time I absorbed my own discomfort without asking for help, I was teaching everyone around me that I didn't need help. Not as a lesson I intended to teach, just as an outcome. I was training them, through years of small and consistent behavior, to look past me when they scanned the room for who needed something. I was becoming, in their eyes, permanently fine. And once a person has been established as permanently fine, it becomes very difficult to communicate that you are not fine, because any evidence to the contrary gets filed under anomaly rather than pattern. The birthday that made this clear happened when I was 16. I had asked for something small, a dinner out, just the family, nothing expensive, maybe pizza. I didn't want presents or a party or anything that required effort. I just wanted an evening where the attention was mine, where my parents sat across a table and asked me about my life. One night, I had been thinking about about it for weeks, longer than I admitted to myself. 3 days before my birthday, my sister's boyfriend ended their relationship. This was treated as a household emergency. She did not go to school for 2 days. She locked herself in the bathroom for hours. She played music at a volume that moved through walls. She called the boy 11 times before noon on the first day and then screamed into her pillow when he didn't pick up. My parents adjusted everything around her. My father brought home her favorite food, stayed up past midnight watching movies with her in the living room, made himself available in a way that, in my memory, he never made himself available to me. My mother took 2 days off work to be home. The household narrowed its focus to a single point: my sister's pain. My birthday arrived on a Thursday. I sat on the front steps that evening eating a cupcake I had bought at the gas station 2 blocks over. Chocolate with white frosting in a plastic dome. $1.49. I had paid with coins from the bottom of my backpack. Through the screen door, I could hear my sister's voice, and I could hear my parents' voices responding to it. She was having a better day, which meant she was filling the house with conversation about the boy and what had happened and what she planned to do. I sat on the steps and ate my cupcake and watched the streetlights come on, one after another, down the block. Nobody came outside. I didn't say anything. Not that night, not the following morning. I didn't want to add to their stress. That was the exact phrase I used in my own mind. I don't want to add to their stress. And I would use it for the next 2 decades. It became the sentence I used to lock a door from the inside. Every time I was about to say something, every time I was about to ask for something or name something that hurt, I said it and the door stayed closed. It became a reflex. Eventually, it became indistinguishable from instinct. The version of myself that arrived at that restaurant on a Tuesday night in October had been built carefully and entirely by that reflex. I had spent 20 years being easy, and I had gotten very good at it. The first time they asked me for money, I was 24. My mother called on a Thursday afternoon with the particular softness she used when she was about to ask for something. She said they were a little short that month. My father's commission was running late. The electric bill was due. Could I cover $200 until the check cleared? She would pay me back by the end of the month. I said yes immediately. I was proud to say yes. I had a job, a real salary, money in my account that wasn't already spent. $200 felt manageable, and more than manageable. It felt like an opportunity. My whole life, I had been the one who didn't need anything. Here was a chance to matter. Here was a way to be useful. I transferred the money within the hour. She did not pay me back by the end of the month. When the month passed, I didn't mention it. I didn't want to add to anyone's stress. The following month, my father's car needed a repair. $500. The month after, my sister needed a deposit on an apartment. $800. She was finally moving out. Wasn't that good news? The deposit was framed as an investment in the family dynamic. I paid it. My sister lived in that apartment for 4 months before moving home. She never returned the money. By the time I was 26, the requests had stopped carrying explanation. They arrived as statements of need rather than stories about bad timing. The dollar amounts climbed in increments small enough that each felt like a manageable step from the last. 200 to 500 to 1200 to 4 figures, delivered in the same apologetic but certain tone as the original electric bill. The amounts grew to fit my perceived capacity, and my perceived capacity kept being confirmed because I kept saying yes. I started managing their impression of my income. I drove a 5-year-old car I could have replaced. I wore the same coats through multiple winters. I never mentioned the bonus structure at my company. I understood clearly that if they knew how much I actually made, they would ask for more. The requests had always been sized to what they believed I could absorb, and revealing the actual number would simply expand the container. So I kept the door closed. I maintained the fiction of someone just comfortable enough to help occasionally, and the fiction was convincing enough that I sometimes had trouble finding the real version of myself underneath it. What I didn't perform was the giving. That was real. The transfers, the check covers, the loans never repaid, all of it was real money leaving my real account and entering theirs. By the time I turned 30, the total was significant in a way I had been carefully not calculating. I didn't know exactly how significant until the night I finally counted. The dinners had a choreography so consistent I could have mapped it on paper. The invitation always came by text, usually from my mother, to the group chat, within a few days of the actual date. No question, no checking of availability, just an announcement, a statement that dinner was happening, a time, a location, the confidence of someone who had never had reason to wonder whether I would show up. The restaurants were always expensive. My sister usually suggested them, somewhere she had seen referenced online, a place with a view or a rooftop or a chef's name in a magazine. And by the next morning, it would be the location, as if there had been a vote and she had won unanimously. These were not places where you could come in and out for $50 a person if you were careful. These were places where the guest menu had no prices. I tried to decline a few times in the early years. I said I was tired, that work had been difficult, that I had plans. The response was always the same in structure. Disappointment delivered as fact, a reminder that family was important, a mild implication that I was letting something down. My mother was best at this. She had a way of making absence sound like abandonment, describing how much my father had been looking forward to it, how my sister was coming all the way across town, how it would mean so much to everyone. So I went. When I arrived, they were always already seated, already mid-drink, comfortable in a way that made my arrival feel like an interruption rather than a completion. I would sit in whatever chair was open and pick up the menu and spend a few minutes recalibrating from the version of myself that had made the 40-minute drive with some residual hope to the version that was now a supporting character in a story that had started without her. The ordering was its own performance. My father never looked at prices. He studied the menu with the focused attention of a man conducting research, then ordered the most interesting cut, the market dish, the special. He asked the server questions that implied expertise. How was this prepared? Where did did it come from? Which wine did they recommend? My mother ordered appetizers for the whole table without asking what anyone wanted. A cheese board she ate most of, a shrimp cocktail she had wanted since she walked in. My sister would consider the menu at length and then order the most expensive entree with a slight air of restraint, as if she had considered something even pricier. She would eat 3 bites and push the plate aside. I ordered the cheapest thing that could be called dinner, a salad, a simple pasta. I drank water. When they ordered wine, I said I was driving. The truth was that I didn't want to add another line to a check I already knew I was going to pay. The conversation was never about me. I don't say this with self-pity. I observed it as a fact the way you observe weather. My sister's life was the primary subject, and it was inexhaustible. My mother added texture and asked follow-up questions. My father commented at intervals. I said appropriate things when addressed directly, and waited. The end of every meal had a particular silence I had learned to recognize from its first note. It came after dessert was cleared and the coffee cups were empty and there was nothing left to order. My father would lean back, my mother would look at the center of the table, my sister would look at her phone, and the leather folder would arrive, placed at the center by a waiter who understood the geometry of the table better than my family cared to, and the silence would deepen around it. Nobody ever reached for it first. My father would go through his pockets with an expression of mild bewilderment, as if his wallet were a shy animal that had wandered off. My mother would open her purse, look into it, close it without removing anything. My sister would not look up, and eventually I would reach across and take the folder. "We'll get the next one," my mother would say. Every time. The same 4 words, delivered the same way. Not quite a promise, more a social convention. "We'll get the next one." I had heard it more times than I could count. There was never a next one. Or rather, there was. They just didn't pay for that one either. There was a night about 2 months before the anniversary dinner when I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed for an hour watching the ceiling, running through the usual list of things that hadn't resolved themselves. A project at work, an unanswered email, the low-grade anxiety that had become such a constant companion that I sometimes forgot it was there and only noticed it by the absence of anything else. My boyfriend was asleep beside me. The apartment was quiet. I got up, went to my home office, and opened my laptop. I didn't open my work email. I don't know exactly what made me do what I did instead. Some combination of sleeplessness and a thought I'd been circling for a while without landing on. A number I sensed was there, somewhere in my transaction history, waiting to be assembled from its parts into something whole and legible. I opened my bank's website. I opened a blank spreadsheet. I started going back through my statements. I went back 1 year first. I labeled a column restaurants and started logging the dinners. Another column, emergency transfers. Another, direct requests. Another, purchases made on their behalf. Another, miscellaneous. I was methodical about it. I had been trained to be methodical. It was literally my profession. And I worked through each month carefully, tagging each line item with a category before moving on. When I reached 12 months, I went back further. 18 months, 2 years, 3 years. I kept going. It took me a long time. The apartment outside my office was perfectly still and perfectly dark, and I sat in the blue light of my laptop building a document that I already knew was going to say something I didn't want to read. At some point, I made coffee. I came back to the desk and kept going. 5 years. I had 5 years of statements and I used all of them. The categories were specific once I started filling them in. There was the dinner category, which was the most visible line. 23 separate restaurant bills I had paid in full or substantially in full over 5 years, ranging from $120 to $640. There was the emergency transfer category, which was the most common. 47 separate transfers, the smallest being $60 and the largest being $2,300. There was the category I labeled direct requests, which included things like my sister asking me to buy her concert tickets, and my father asking me to cover a registration fee for a business course he never finished, and my mother asking me to pay for a spa day she'd already booked for herself and my sister. There was the miscellaneous column, which was where I put things that didn't fit anywhere else. The time I paid for a family vacation rental because everyone else was short. The time I bought my father a new set of golf clubs for his birthday after he mentioned 3 times in 2 weeks that his were getting old. I added the columns. The software added them together. The number was $62,450. I sat back in my chair and looked at it. Not 6,200, 62,000. The kind of number you put in front of the word dollars and it changes the weight of the sentence. $62,000 was a down payment on a house. It was 2 years of graduate school. It was the trip to Japan I had been telling myself I would take someday, taken 20 times over. It was 6 months of not working. It was a security margin that would have meant never lying awake at 3 in the morning worrying about what would happen if my car broke down, or my company went through layoffs, or my body decided to stop cooperating. It was the foundation of something. Instead, it had been used to fund dinners I hadn't eaten and car repairs on vehicles I didn't drive, and apartment deposits that lasted 4 months. I did not cry. I think I had expected something dramatic to happen in my chest. Some collapse of the fiction I had been maintaining, some grief for the money or for what the money represented. But what I felt was cooler than that. I felt the way you feel when you get a lab result that confirms something your body already told you. Not surprised exactly, but clarified. The number was large enough to be undeniable. I could not look at it and tell myself any longer that I was just helping out, that it was occasional, that it was manageable, that it was what you did for family. It was not occasional. It was systematic. And I had been the system. I saved the spreadsheet. I named it family tax. I closed the laptop. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep, but I lay there in the dark with a stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. The particular stillness of a decision that has not yet been named but has already been made. The anniversary dinner was not something I could have declined. Not because I tried and failed. failed, I didn't try. I had already committed to going before the invitation arrived, in the same way you commit to things that you know are coming and feel, for reasons that are not entirely rational, obligated to face. Their 35th anniversary. 35 years was significant. I wanted to mark it. Not for them exactly, and more not only for them, for myself. For the part of me that had not yet stopped hoping that we were capable of a different kind of evening. I had been working on the gift for 6 weeks. The idea came to me when I was visiting my parents' house in the summer and found a cardboard box in the top of the hall closet. One of those boxes that appears in every family home and outlasts everyone's ability to explain its contents, full of photographs. The prints were old, some of them faded at the edges, some curled at the corners from humidity. There were pictures of my parents before they were my parents, young and lit differently than I had ever seen them, looking at the camera with expressions I didn't recognize as belonging to them. There were pictures of their early years together, apartment kitchens, road trips, holidays with people I didn't know. There were pictures of my sister and me as children, and I found myself standing at the closet for longer than I had planned, looking at a version of our family that existed before I was old enough to know what it was. I asked if I could borrow the box to scan some of the photos. My mother said of course without asking why, and I carried the box home and spent 3 weekends scanning every photograph, cleaning up the digital files, and working with a restoration service to repair the worst of the damage, the faded colors, the scratches, the mold spots at the corners. Then I assembled the best of them into a leather-bound album, chronological, starting with the earliest image I could find, my parents at what appeared to be someone's graduation, my mother with different hair, my father wearing a jacket he would never wear now, and ending with a photograph from the previous Thanksgiving, one I had taken on my phone when nobody was looking and nobody was performing anything. It took more time than I had expected and cost more than I had planned, and I cared about it more than was probably wise. I wrapped it in tissue paper inside the bag. I kept it in my closet for 2 weeks before the dinner, taking it out once to look at it and then putting it back. On the night of the anniversary, I worked until 6:30, which was later than I had intended. I changed in my office into the clothes I had brought, a black dress, low heels, and then caught traffic on the bridge that added 20 minutes to a drive that was already long. I stopped at a gas station to use the bathroom and fix my hair and put on the blazer I had folded in my bag. I texted the group chat from the parking lot, running behind, traffic on the bridge. Please order appetizers without me. I'll be there by 7:15. 3 red receipts. No replies. I drove the rest of the way with the gift bag on the passenger seat, and the particular feeling of someone approaching an event they have rehearsed in their head enough times that the actual version can't help but feel slightly off. I had imagined arriving and finding them in the middle of drinks, conversation flowing, a seat waiting for me with a menu and a water glass. I had imagined presenting the album and watching my mother open it. I had imagined my father looking at the early photographs and saying something I couldn't quite script in advance, but felt the shape of something honest, something that acknowledged time. I had been imagining a version of my family that required them to be different people than they were. I pulled into the lot at 7:41. The hostess at the door looked up a reservation and led me through the dining room without any of the warmth she had probably used earlier in the evening for people arriving with anticipation intact. Or maybe she did use warmth and I couldn't receive it. The room was full and lit well and smelled expensive, and it was the kind of place where the ambient noise had been tuned, acoustics, carpet, table spacing, so that you could hear the people at your own table and almost nothing else, which created the feeling of being in a private room, even when you weren't. I spotted my family's table from across the room. The seafood tower that had been the centerpiece of the table was gone. Only the stand remained, a silver structure holding a few scraped shells on a bed of crushed ice that had begun to melt. 2 wine bottles. The first was empty, lying tilted in the ice bucket. The second was upright on the table with perhaps an inch remaining in it, which my mother was reaching for as I approached. She poured a glass for herself without looking up. My father had the posture he adopted after a complete meal. Settled, finished, the posture of a man who has accomplished what he came to do. His jacket was unbuttoned. His color was high from the wine. He was not looking in my direction. My sister was using her phone as a mirror, tilting it to check something in her hair near her ear. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. She looked good and she knew it. She glanced up when I was about 5 feet from the table, registered my presence with a slight adjustment of expression, and looked back at her phone. My mother saw me first. "Oh look, here she is," she said, in the voice she used to announce things that required a response from the group. My father looked up. My sister put her phone on the table. I reached the table and stopped. I looked at the chairs. There were 4 of them around the table, one for each of us, mine pulled slightly away from the table as if prepared for occupancy, but not actually set. No silverware, no napkin, no water glass. The waiter had not placed anything at my seat because there was no expectation of me eating. Whatever had been ordered and eaten at this table, it had been ordered and eaten without me, and the place setting I would have needed had either been cleared away or never arranged at all. On the placemat in front of my chair, placed squarely in the center, was the black leather folder. Just that. Just the check. I stood there for a moment. I set the gift bag on the floor beside my chair. I sat down. Traffic was bad, I said. Not an apology exactly. A fact. I had texted ahead. I had said I would be late. I had asked them to order appetizers. What I was looking at was not an accident of timing. We were starving, my mother said. She said it pleasantly, with a slight note of explanation, the way you explain the weather, as if hunger were a force that moved through the world on its own, independent of anyone's choices. We ended up just going ahead. The food came out so quickly. "Did you save me a menu?" I asked. There was a pause. My father looked at the ceiling. My sister looked at her phone. "I think we can ask for one," my mother said, though she didn't move to ask. I looked at the folder in front of me. Then I looked at the table, the scraped shells, the empty glasses, the signs of a complete meal eaten by 3 people, and I understood, with a clarity that was physical rather than intellectual, what this evening had been organized to accomplish. I looked at my mother. She was already reaching for her coat. "You don't mind covering this one, do you, honey?" she said. Her voice was soft. She made it sound small. "You know your father forgot his card." My sister didn't look up. "You're always so good at this," she said, not urgently, casually. "The way you compliment someone on a skill they have always had and will always have, and that exists for your benefit." I looked at the folder. I looked at my family. I picked up my phone. In the 6 years I had been paying for this family's meals, I had rehearsed a different version of this moment many times. Not in any organized way, not deliberately, but somewhere in the background of my daily life, in the 10 minutes before sleep or the 40 minutes of a commute, some part of me had been quietly running scenarios. What if I said something? What if I pushed back? What if I sat at the end of a dinner, leather folder in hand, and said, "No, not this time. Something's different now." In every version of that scenario, I had imagined consequences. My father's anger, the specific variety he deployed when he felt his authority was being challenged, which was not loud but was cold in a way that took up a lot of space in a room. My mother's tears, which were real tears, genuinely felt, but were also deployed at moments that benefited from them. A skill she had practiced long enough that the strategy and the emotion had become indistinguishable from each other. My sister's contempt, clean and undisguised. The look she had given me at every moment in my life when I had done something she considered small. And underneath all of that was a fear I had never named precisely, which was that if I refused, I would lose them. Not just the evenings, not just the group chat and the dinners and the occasional phone calls that were mostly my mother asking me to do something. I would lose the category of belonging to a family, which is an abstract thing, and I knew it was abstract. But abstractions can cost as much as concrete things when you built your sense of safety around them. I looked at the folder on the placemat. I thought about the spreadsheet. I thought about the number at the bottom of it. Not the individual transactions, not the specific dinners or the apartment deposits or the emergency transfers, but the total, $62,450. I could see it in my mind with the precision of something I had read and reread many times, which I had, alone in the blue light of my home office at 3 in the morning. I could see the column labels and the totals and the 5-year scope of it. And I thought, with a clarity that surprised me, that the fear I had been managing all these years, the fear of losing them, of being exiled from the family, of not belonging, had already materialized. It had materialized not with a dramatic exit, but gradually, over years, through the accumulation of evenings like this one. I had never been the one they were celebrating. I had been the one who made the celebrating possible. The distinction had always been there. I had just chosen, consistently and voluntarily, not to look at it. I was looking at it now. My mother's voice came from somewhere slightly outside my focus. "You don't mind covering this one, do you, honey? Your father forgot his card." I was aware of her saying it. I was aware of my sister not looking up from her phone. I was aware of my father examining the ceiling with the studied calm of a man who is pretending he is not involved in the thing he is involved in. All of it was familiar. The choreography was flawless. They had done it dozens of times, and each time it had worked, which meant each time I had completed my part of it, and the system had continued. I thought about what would happen if I didn't complete my part. My mother would have to pay, or my father would have to find his card or acknowledge that he had simply chosen not to bring one, or my sister, who had ordered 2 courses and a cocktail, would have to contribute something toward the meal she had just eaten. These were inconveniences. Large inconveniences, possibly, depending on how thin their actual budget was, which I had stopped being able to assess clearly, because they had never been honest with me about it, and I had never been honest with them about my own. But they were inconveniences that they were fully capable of managing. They were not emergencies. Nobody was going to be harmed by paying their own bill. I had been treating inconveniences as emergencies for 6 years. I had been treating their discomfort as my responsibility. I had been the buffer between them and the ordinary consequences of their own decisions, and the result was that they had never experienced those consequences, and they had no reason to believe tonight would be any different. I put my phone on the table. I didn't reach for my purse. I looked at my mother and waited until she looked back at me, until there was actual eye contact, not the soft, unfocused gaze she used when she was asking for something and didn't want to fully see the person she was asking. When she looked at me, I held it. "I'm not covering the bill tonight," I said. My mother's expression moved through several things in quick succession. Confusion first, then the beginning of a laugh, the kind of laugh that assumes a joke is being made and wants to acknowledge it so it can move on. Then she looked at my face and the laugh didn't come. "What?" she said. "I'm not paying for the dinner," I said. My voice was steady. I had not planned the words, but they were coming out clearly, which surprised me. "I arrived 40 minutes ago. I didn't eat. I had 1 iced tea, which I haven't ordered yet. I'll pay for that." My father's attention had returned to the table. He was looking at me now with the expression he used when something had interrupted a plan he had assumed was settled. He opened his mouth. "I'm going to ask the manager to separate the check," I said. The manager was a man in his 40s with the particular composure of someone who had seen every variety of difficult dinner situation and had developed a methodology for all of them. He arrived at the table within 30 seconds of being flagged, moving through the dining room with the unhurried efficiency of someone who knows that urgency and speed are not the same thing. "Is everything all right?" he asked. He was addressing the table, but he was reading it. The empty plates, the leather folder still closed at my seat, the specific atmosphere of a family that had stopped performing harmony at each other. "I'd like to separate my portion of the check," I said. "I arrived about 10 minutes ago. I haven't eaten anything. I've had 1 iced tea. I'd like to order it now and pay for it separately." He looked at me. He looked at the table. He did not ask a follow-up question. "Of course," he said. "I'll take care of that that right now. My mother's hand had stopped moving toward her coat. My father was very still in his chair. My sister had put her phone face down on the table, which was more attention than she had given to anything since I arrived. The manager returned in a few minutes. He placed a separate, smaller slip in front of me. The iced tea I had not yet received. He was already sending a server for it, plus a line indicating no food. The total was $3. I opened my wallet. I took out a $5 bill. I placed it on top of the slip. "Keep the change," I said. I folded my hands on the table. My mother looked at the main folder, which was still sitting untouched at the center of the table. She looked at my father. My father looked at the folder. The number inside it was $618. It had been ordered and eaten by 3 people, none of whom had brought sufficient means to cover it, because for 6 years there had been no reason to. "Frank," my mother said quietly. My father reached for his wallet. My father's wallet was brown leather, worn at the edges, always slightly overstuffed with receipts he never sorted through. He pulled it from the inside pocket of his jacket with the practiced ease of a man performing a routine, and I watched the performance begin. He opened the wallet. He looked into it. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, just a slight recalibration around the eyes, and he began the search. Front pocket, side pocket, the little slot behind the credit cards where he sometimes kept a folded bill. He patted his jacket again, then his slacks, then the jacket once more. He turned back to the wallet. "I've got a card here," he said, pulling one out and squinting at it. He held it for a moment, then placed it on top of the folder with the authority of someone who is not yet willing to concede that something is wrong. The manager picked it up without comment and carried it to the terminal. My sister had retrieved her phone from the table but was no longer looking at it. She was watching my father with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not concern exactly, more the look of someone watching a situation develop that they had assumed was already handled. My mother was very quiet. She was sitting with her coat half gathered in her lap, not standing, not sitting fully either, suspended in the posture of someone who expected the moment to resolve and was waiting for it. The manager returned. He held the card out to my father at a slight distance, the way you hand something back when the gesture needs to communicate something beyond itself. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "That card was declined." The table was silent. My father took the card. He looked at it as if it had done something unexpected, which it had not, which it had in fact done before. In context, he had managed by having me sitting nearby. He put it back in his wallet. He looked at my mother. "The backup card," my mother said quietly. She opened her purse and found it after a moment, a visa she carried for emergencies, which she said rarely to anyone, and demonstrated through the wallet she brought to expensive restaurants while expecting someone else to pay. My father took it without a word and placed it on the folder. The manager took it. My sister looked at me across the table. The boredom was gone. In its place was something more complicated, a reckoning of some kind, a rapid reassessment of the evening's architecture. She had built this dinner on an assumption. The assumption had just stopped being reliable, and she was working out what that meant in real time. "You're really not going to help," she said. It came out less like an accusation than a statement of disbelief, as if I had failed to perform a law of physics. "I already paid," I said. $3 for an iced tea." The manager returned with the visa. He handed it to my father. It had gone through. My father signed the receipt. His hand was not steady. He did not fill in the tip line. He pushed the folder to the edge of the table without looking at it again. My mother's coat was back over her arm. She was not looking at me. Nobody spoke for a moment. The bill was paid, the folder was closed, and the evening had officially ended, except that none of them stood up. My mother sat with her coat in her lap, looking at the table. My father was turned slightly away from the group, his jaw set, his hand flat on the tablecloth. My sister was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not contempt, not boredom, not the lazy superiority she had worn for as long as I could remember. It was something closer to recognition, like she was seeing something she had suspected was there, but had counted on never having to look at directly. "You know this changes things," my sister said. "I know," I said. My father made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He pushed back from the table and stood, buttoning his jacket with the deliberate movements of a man who is using his hands to avoid using his mouth. He moved toward the exit without saying anything to me. My mother stood, folded her coat over her arm, looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between grief and betrayal, and then followed him. My sister stayed in her seat for a moment. She looked at the gift bag on the floor beside my empty chair. She looked at me. "You still brought a gift," she said. "I did," I said. She looked at the bag for another moment, then at me, and I could not tell. I genuinely could not read whether what was in her expression was contempt or something else. She picked up her phone and her jacket and walked out. I sat alone at the table. The waiter came and collected my slip, the one for $3 paid. He looked at the remaining detritus of the meal, the scraped shells, the used glasses, the signed receipt my father had left at the edge of the table without a tip. The waiter began clearing the things methodically, not making eye contact with me, not commenting on anything. I reached down and picked up the gift bag. I held it for a moment. The leather album was inside it, wrapped in tissue paper. 47 years of my parents' photographs, restored. The early ones, the ones from before I existed. I held the bag and thought about putting it back on the floor and walking out without it. And then I stood up and carried it with me. At the door of the restaurant, I stopped. Through the glass, I could see the valet stand and the lit circle of the driveway, and beyond it, the dark of the lot and the shimmer of the harbor. My parents were somewhere out there, walking to their car, or standing at it, or talking to each other in the way they talked when something had gone wrong, and they needed to decide whose fault it was. I pushed through the door. The October air came at me immediately, cool and salt-edged, carrying the smell of the water. I stood on the top step for a moment, the bag in my hand, the sound of the restaurant falling away behind me as the door swung closed. My own car was 2 blocks away in the self parking lot. I had walked over because I hadn't wanted to pay the valet flaky. I started walking. Behind me, through the glass door of the restaurant, the table where we had been sitting was already being reset. White cloth smoothed down, new place settings arranged, new candles lit, ready for whoever came next. I didn't look back.